Noes of 15, Clause 2 will stand part. The question now is a Clause 3 stand part. The Honourable David Parker.
Mr Chairman, the Labor Party will be supporting Clause 3 of this bill, which amends the International Finance Agreements Act 1961. Mr Chairman, we're not in the Labor Party selective in the advice that we take from the International Monetary Fund. And I think it is appropriate at this point to record that whilst the current government is giving effect to the changes that are recommended by the IMF Governing Board to the amounts and governing amounts to be contributed to the IMF by different countries, it seems to be rejecting advice that it's getting from the IMF on other quarters. The International Monetary Fund has moved on considerably in relation to settings that are important for an open, small economy such as New Zealand. And they have noted that countries like New Zealand are suffering the vicissitudes of changing practice around the world relating to currency manipulation, or arising from currency manipulation and changing monetary policy settings in other countries in the world. Indeed, Mr Olivier Blanchard, the Chief Economist at the International Monetary Fund, is on record as saying that countries that are performing better than New Zealand in respect of their external balance, that's their balance with the rest of the world, are using more than one instrument to target more than one objective, rather than as New Zealand does, which is effectively use the interest rate, the official cash rate, to control inflationary pressures in the economy to the exclusion of virtually everything else, pursuant to legislation which requires the Reserve Bank to give primacy to targeting inflation ahead of other important aspects of economic management like the exchange rate. Rather than the New Zealand regime, other countries are pursuing an alternative path. And even if the path that originally was taken by New Zealand was necessary to stamp out inflation, which was so entrenched in the 1970s and early 1980s, the primacy that is given still to New Zealand in targeting inflation ahead of other matters of economic management is now causing more harm than good. And so whilst the theoretical objectives of inflation targeting were right for their day, their time has passed. And even if they were right, if everyone in the world was still pursuing that same course, when other countries in the world, as has been noted by the International Monetary Fund, when other countries of the world are pursuing a different course, then the effects on a country like New Zealand are that we suffer the consequences of their policy until and unless we change our own. And at the moment, because New Zealand doesn't change the settings under this government, just puts up with what we had previously, we are seeing a narrowing of our export base. Now, members will recall that Bill English and the National Government at the time they were elected said that their primary objective was to rebalance the economy away from consumption towards savings and export growth.
How are we doing?
Not well, Dr Clark, not well. New Zealand this year is predicted to have the worst current account deficit in the Western world. Now, the government, national government jumps up and they says, well, the current account deficit isn't as bad as it was for 2 years under the prior Labor government. Beg your pardon? As it was, I am actually. I'm saying that the government is a bit inconsistent in its acceptance of the help and advice that comes from the International Monetary Fund. The government says that because the current account deficit has been higher, that they've somehow fixed the problem. The problem for the government is that they haven't. The current account deficit is getting worse. Beg your pardon? Unemployment? Unemployment's got worse as well, actually. The exchange rate is so high, in part, Mr Hayes, because New Zealand refuses to react to the change in world practice where other countries are actively intervening in their economies so as to maintain a competitive exchange rate for the benefit of their exporters. New Zealand isn't doing that. As a consequence, we hear them say, oh, well, look, manufacturing's okay. Actually, manufacturing's okay in the primary sector. There's still as many litres of milk to be processed and still as many livestock to be processed. But outside of our primary sector, our exporters are not thriving. Construction manufacturing is coming again in New Zealand on the back of the Christchurch rebuild, but our rebalance towards exports is not occurring. So, Mr. Speaker, whilst we...
Mr. Chair.
Call Dr. David Clark.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I actually want to build on what my colleague Mr. Parker was saying, because I think he makes the valid point that the IMF advice is generally pretty good. And what we have here is a government that picks and chooses which it chooses to implement and which it doesn't. And so a good example is a capital gains tax. This government has, I'm sure, heard or read from the IMF that it suggests a capital gains tax is a sensible way forward. New Zealand is one of only 3 OECD countries that doesn't currently have a capital gains tax. Mr. Hayes knows that. We know that one of those 3 is a tax haven, Switzerland, in effect. Another is Turkey. And then there's little old New Zealand, the 3 countries in the Western world that don't have a capital gains tax. And the unfortunate thing with the absence of a capital gains tax in New Zealand at the moment is that it distorts investment decisions. So it's part of the picture as to why our manufacturing sector is losing jobs. The primary sector is fine because indeed the investment decision is towards, the investment bias is towards land and capital assets, and so we have farmers who are farming for capital gain, which unfortunately they can only realise at the end of their careers, and that's an unfortunate incentive. There are a lot of farmers I've spoken to who say it would be better to be farming on the basis of a competitive environment where the farmers who farmed best made the best profits, not those who amassed the most capital gains over their lifetime, rather those who adopted the farm practices here and now that generated returns, that participated in international strategies, that saw New Zealand's product rise up the value chain. But instead we have a lot of farmers who are resigned to the fact that this government is condemning them to farming for capital gains that they won't realise until they retire, or if they're old and tired and they die on the job, that they'll never see. Their family might get some benefit out of through the capital gain. So there are a lot of farmers who see that the current situation is not ideal and who would actually welcome a capital gains tax because they understand the importance of growing our economy, of having an economy that rewards those who engage in effective business practices here and now. And of course, with a more neutral investment signal, we'll also see people weighing up decisions as to whether they take what is effectively a tax break and investing them in residential property, or whether they choose instead to use their expertise in the business sector to invest in good manufacturing industries and other good innovative business ideas. So we want more export jobs in the Labour Party. This national government seems to have its hands off the wheel when it comes to the economy, and we see the results of that, the worst economic growth record of any government in the last 50 years. This government has a shocking record on economic growth. And I contend, Mr. Chair, in the context of this debate, that is precisely because it chooses what advice from the IMF it will put into practice, what it will sign up to, what it will not sign up to. And by cherry-picking according to immediate political considerations, it misses the wider objective of economic growth for the benefit of all of New Zealand's citizens. So a capital gains tax is illustrative of this approach by the government and the cost on New Zealand. We see real wages dropping in New Zealand. We see manufacturing jobs going. We see unemployment as high as it was in the 90s when we last had a national government, and we see a balance of trade, a shocking balance of trade that is projected to be the worst in the developed world next year, all because of decisions, balance of payments, Mr. Parker corrects me and he's right, worst balance of payments in the Western world. And it's because Mr Hayes and others like him are not comfortable with entertaining these solutions from the IMF that don't suit their current political narrative. At least I've got to assume that. I've got to assume there's good intention in there somewhere. But it's not immediately obvious why the National Party seems to be against business, seems to be against manufacturing and seems to be against growing the economy. This government talks about business, but it seems to do nothing that supports New Zealand businesses. And New Zealand businesses, as we know, are crying out.
The question is, a clause 3 stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Party votes called for. Ask the clerk for a party vote.
New Zealand National.
59 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party.
14 opposed.
New Zealand First.
7 votes in favour.
Māori Party.
3 in favour.
Mana.
1 opposed.
Act New Zealand.
1 in favour.
United Future.
1 in favour.
Brendan Horan.
1 vote in favour.
Members, the ayes are 106, the noes are 15. Clause 3 will stand part. We now move to clause 4. The question is that clause 4 stand part.
Mr. Chairman.
The Honourable David Parker.
Mr. Chairman, just before I address